Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Losers. So, this movie is going to be heading to Netflix's near you fairly soon. And so, if you eventually catch this movie later or already have this movie somewhere in your collection or whatever, and you do not want to go out of your way to say that you've seen this movie probably on a number of things like a C Movies app or a Fox HD Movies app to just kind of catch it there and not have to wait X amount of days till Netflix. But like I think that this movie is probably going to be a very big hit on Netflix because probably a lot of people had never heard of it, or if people did hear of it, then they'll immediately just be like, "Oh yeah, I remember this kind of movie." like, cause like to me, I think this movie represents a kind of film. Like we have honestly a very heavy action oriented movie that completely forgets that it also has to have a script. You do have unique characters that are kind of fun to play around with in this film. Like you do have a good like kind of support system of these people, but like I can't help but think like this is just kind of like if this movie kind of feels like a Mission Impossible movie where it's just like, hey, we can't wait to blow things up, and like story, like what does it even need to be, because the villain doesn't even need to be seen up until a good like start of a film. So going into here, I would say that like probably watching this now, and like this is my first ever watching of this, like it might have not have like sat well for me. Maybe if I were to watch this again later, I would probably have a different perspective, or I would have a different feel of this movie. Also realizing that The Losers was a comic book adaptation, I'm like, okay, how is it that they like made these stories so much better in books compared to film? Considering like they have to sell you on story, but this movie just was like, hey man, blow more stuff up. like, let's just kind of get to a bouncing ball of where we have to eventually go after somebody, but like that's all this movie just becomes. Like it kind of becomes like a revenge story, but it also just becomes like people getting their life back kind of story as well. So like to me, I kind of feel like this movie at probably best is probably an okay film. Like to me, the like story doesn't exist in this film. Uh, but really, it's just like there's something about these characters that are to have like this charm or thing to, I guess, just win you over with this film. But like it's such a super generic film. It's such a super generic action movie, and it's just like there has to be something more than star power to get you through this film, and there isn't a thing that it exists with beyond that, with just like a general action movie, a decent cast. Like I would probably even have the same kind of like approach to probably like the Mission Impossible, like every single one of those movies, even though I might hold the very first Mission Impossible movie in very high regard, but still like that's like the easiest thing that I can pull from. Like this kind of feels like the later Fast and the Furious movies where they're just kind of like hey man, just pack it in with all kinds of stuff, and like let's transition to 12 different places and we'll just figure out why later. So, with that said, yeah, I think that's all I got for. I guess let's tee up this movie for people that have never heard of this before. So, The Losers, what is this about in the tee up fashion? Well, we have a group of military forces who had all tried to go on and do a certain mission where it ended up that supposedly some people had gotten killed during that mission, which led this whole team of merry men to decide that they're all gonna just become ghosts and go after the man that had went and tried to basically just counter control this whole mission, to where these guys basically forcibly like wanted to do the right thing, but this one guy who was to be named Max was to every way around it basically like wanted this mission done his way, and if not, these guys were going to be dead because of it. So we have these guys who all become ghosts to eventually just not be able to try to get back to the United States, and so eventually they just kind of become nomads for a while. And basically we end up having this cast who ends up with a girl named Aisha, who is to be the main girl in this movie, who is to say, like, well, hey, like, I have some information of how you can get back at Max. And they're like, oh, wow, that sounds great. And then we go on to a plethora of action sequences to get certain things. And then, like, eventually we get more and more things to eventually get to have Max be in a bad spot, and now he has to desperately kind of tie himself to people to try to get this whole mission that he wants done. So, and eventually that leads this group of ragtag team to go and be up against Max in his plan for world domination. So, with that said, yeah, that's all that I wanted to say about this movie in a very cryptic-like sense, because it's a super generic movie. There is a lot of fun spots with some of the characters. Of course, Chris Evans is a very fun character. He is kind of bringing into the story some kind of fun things. And so, yeah, like, other than that, like, basically it is what it is for this movie. So let's go out of our way to say that we've seen this movie, because technically we have, and let's go on to that coveted double 5-time territory, because it is about that time again to go into spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So there's a lot of jumping around, and I hope I get a bulk of this movie correct, because reasonably, there's just a lot of, like, unimportant things, honestly, in this movie. Like, why did we have to get this one little, like, gizmo of a thing just to tell us that, like, we can't do anything really with this gizmo, but we can just hold it over Max? Ooh, wow, that's great. Like, they went out of their way to get this one little, like USB port of a thing, and I'm like, like, what an ill-important thing that was, but whatever. Like, I guess they just wanted to, like, have a movie that just seemed cool for whatever reasons. So, but anyways, we are to first drop off at a place called Bolivia. So we have this Army Enforcement Division, whoever these people are, the losers, who are going on to a mission to fight and kill a guy named Fidel. Supposedly Fidel is to have some terrorist assembly, and he is to be nearby the Madre del Rios, or Dios. I'm going to ill-pronounce this. Madre de Dios River Basin. Okay. And so that leads, all these guys have to do is paint these lasers all over the place where the bad guys are, so that way all of these guys can get wiped out. And so, like, okay, great, this is a pretty easy mission, because if anything, if we had to forcibly go over there, and try to kill all these guys. There's a ton of guys with AK-47s, and it would be insane to have to go actually over there and to try and kill all of them. So they're just going to send an airstrike instead. So all of a sudden uh, we have Clay's character who is to eventually have some of the people spot that there is some refugees there, or there are some like innocents being like taken out of this truck who are all childrens, who are all kids. So Clay is to call off the airstrike and basically tell them like, hey, like abort mission. If anything, uh we like there is like a factor that like we didn't like understand until now. And so they're like, well, we're gonna go through the mission anyways because we're just gonna go through it. So like so all of a sudden Clay just damages like the laser pointer thing that is to kind of take down all these people. And so Clay is to mention that I'm sorry, but we have the lasers are having malfunctions, and so you're not going to be able to get to your targets. And so there's a counter of that where it's just like, well, hey, we already know where the positions all are, so like it's easy for us to just be able to like easily wipe these out anyways. So Clay is just like, who am I speaking to? And of course, this is a guy named Max who's kind of telling where these guys are to go. So now this whole entire group has to now scramble to go and find these kids, kill every single man that is basically to be involved in this project. And so that leads eventually to Clay even making it to Fadil and trying to take this kid away from Fadil. So, but yeah, so what ends up happening is they scramble and get all of the kids, put them on some bus, and get the heck out of there. They kill everybody, all the villains, most of them, anyways. So that leads them to have this helicopter that is going and retrieving them. And so the helicopter is just like, hey, it's either the kids or it's you guys. And so Clay is just like, well, take all the kids. So uh, the helicopter is to leave, and so Max is to call out to this jet to fire upon this helicopter. And so the jet, of course, does. And so that kills all of these kids. And so we are supposed to naturally assume that Clay and all these men are to just be dead as well, or to be ghosts as well. Because if anything, if they are to try to get out of here, they are to probably just die anyway. So they might as well just say that they're missing in action or that they're dead. So that way this can just be this could just be like a simple like, well, we're gonna be ghosts until we can figure out like how the heck we can get back to like America or whatever. Uh so that leads us to having these guys get out of their military like fatigues and whatever, their military clothes, and eventually finding like a place to basically just disappear for X amount of time. We see both Clay and we see both Rogue, who are eventually going and watching like chickens fighting chickens and whatever. And so eventually, like, we have Clay who's like, well, this would be a lot more fun if we were drunk, huh? And Rogue is like, you're not drunk? Like, okay. So, but eventually Clay is to, eventually have someone follow him. Obviously, Aisha's character. So, eventually Clay and Aisha are to make it to this bar, and so we have Aisha that is basically propositioning Clay, and so she's basically having them both come upstairs. So Aisha is to say that she can help Clay get Max, and while this is going on, like they're basically fighting throughout this whole hotel room. Like this whole hotel room is basically just like being in flames. And at one point in time, they stop their fighting and they say hi to one another, and then they just continue on fighting. And I'm just like, okay. So Aisha like and Clay eventually like Aisha is to tell him what is to go on. And so we just eventually see Clay and Aisha like getting out of this hotel room that is now burnt down. And so uh, once Aisha is kind of done telling Clay everything, Clay had recorded everything and he let her know that just so that way, like, hey, like if you f with me, you're gonna die. You're gonna be killed. So like yeah, like you are gonna regret this. So Clay is to eventually go on to tell all of his teammates, hey, like we have a job, and a lot of people are just really skeptic about this. They're like, are you serious? Like, I don't think that this is gonna work out. So, uh, but eventually they all go along with it anyways. So, pushing us on to all of these guys eventually heading to a place that is right around the U.S. Mexico border. So, Max is to have his his henchman named Wade go and chuck a man off of a building, and then Max is like, "Why did you chuck him off this building? Like, if anything, you could have just like punched him. Like, if anything, my nod was just to tell you to punch him. Like, I wasn't like telling you to throw him off the building. Like, read the nods." And so Wade is just like, who cares? Like, but Max is just like, that guy was a genius, and if anything, like, it's just a shame that he ended up getting killed off. But eventually, Max is in front of his like guy that is to give him like what he needs, which is like a motorcycle and a number of big, huge, fat bombs. We have uh, we have this scientist of a guy who is to eventually tell Max it's like, well, from what you need, you're going to need a lot of money to do that. And so Max is like, no problem. Because eventually Max is to have some like portable device to keep $4 million worth of money in this portable device that eventually they can't really hack into because eventually they need a certain specific location to go and uh like go and exchange or take out this money from some kind of odd like source. So, but we'll get there. So Alicia is to say that they are to be on a mission to go and get Max. And Max is supposedly in this armored car. Supposedly. So the guys are just like, okay, great. Like, we're going to get Max. This is awesome. So we have Wade, who is basically in another car right next to Max's, and so like they're kind of waiting to like transport like Max. There's a whole mission about getting Max. So what ends up happening is we end up having Pooch, uh, who is basically like the wheelman of this operation, is to eventually get a helicopter and have this giant magnet that is to connect onto this armored car. And so we have Jenkins, who is Chris Evans' character, who is crossbowing the back of this armored truck closed. And so we eventually have Wade, who is to have binoculars, and he is to see who is in this helicopter, and he is to notice that it is a guy named Pooch that he knows all well. So, this armored car is to be attached via magnetized and taken, and so we have Wade who has this big, massive gun. He's like firing away at this thing, and so like the helicopter is to have like taken on some like hits. So, but eventually, like this helicopter is perfectly fine to take this armored truck to this other location to showcase what is in this armored truck. So what ends up happening is this group ends up pouring gasoline into this armored truck. And so once they finally open it, all these armored men come out of the truck. And so Clay's mentioned to all of them, like, well, hey, like, you guys had been poured like gasoline on. Like, if you try to fire your guns, you'll just light yourself on fire. Like, it would be a very stupid decision for you to do that right now. So basically, all the guys eventually end up just like, we have a lot of times where a lot of guys have to get like tranquilized by a lot of these guys, or hit with rubber bullets or whatever to not really just kill all of them. But anyways, so what ends up happening is they end up finding that Max isn't actually in this armored car after all. That it's just some like I said, like USB port of a money laundering thing. That Rogue is thinking like, well, hey, how about we use this thing to like hold against Max and like buy our freedom. And Clay is just like, dude, if we even try that, he's just gonna kill us anyways. Like, so, like, there would be no difference from us doing this. So we're just kind of like, they're basically to have this thing just to see if they can eventually try to, like, siphon off of this thing. And so, eventually that leads us to Jensen, who is Chris Evans' character, going into this office to supposedly be able to like fix the like Wi-Fi or something for this one officer, but instead he's actually, I guess, transferring all of the money over. And once he ends up trying to sneak out of this office because he was a guy that went into this elevator and started taking off all of his clothes, to all of a sudden the women were just like, ooh, and so Jenkins or Jensen's character was like, "Hey, you like the angle of my dangle?" Like, we also had him as some like bike messenger or whatever who was singing like Journey when he was to come into this elevator. And so once the mission continues, like it has that same Journey song that Chris Evans is trying to escape this building from. So uh we have Jensen that is kind of pulling a Neo, where he wants like the guys to help him try to find an exit to this building because there's guys chasing after him. So they tell him to go to like the southwest like corner or whatever. So uh Jensen is to head to these elevators, and there of course is security guards that are trying to stop him. And so now Jensen is now to tell these guys, it's like, well, I'm just letting you know that I have these mental powers. Like, and so all of a sudden we have Jensen who puts his like these two guns out, and all of a sudden starts to fire on all these guys. And so Jensen then turns around and is like, "Yay! Like, thanks." And Cougar is just like, "Nah, like as if either one of them can see either one of this. Like, maybe Cougar can because he has eagle eyes or whatever." But so Evans is to get the heck out of there, and so that eventually leads us to now. Because they kept figuring out, they kept trying, they eventually traced where like the money kept getting like changed or exchanged to, like, so they were able to easily figure out that like there was one home place that like this money could get exchanged. So So this leads us on to now having still the guys needing still to have to go after Max for the second, third, who's counting anymore? So Max is to now eventually still need the things from this one scientist. And this scientist has gone on to like take supposedly more precautions that if anybody's getting is to try to have him get thrown off this roof, that he has dogs present. I'm like, oh yeah, dogs are gonna do so much to anybody. So but yeah, so this guy is to say, well, I have the stuff, do you have the money, kind of thing. We have Wade, who's basically just like, well, no, I don't have the money is coming. And so like the guy's just like, no, like I'm not going to deal with like a check that I can't cash, kind of thing, or I'm not going to like I'm not going to not get paid for this. So what eventually ends up happening is that uh, we now have to go on to, if we weren't doing like almost a suicide mission before, like this mission is really almost as close as it gets to a suicide mission. And so we end up also finding out that Aisha is actually involved with Fadil, and how like she eventually is to like just start double crossing all of these guys and is to start to run off because eventually Aisha is to like find out that Fadil was killed by Clay, and so eventually like the score is going to have to get settled up. So Alicia is to eventually turn on all these guys, and so like that leads but right before like that, these guys have to go to on a mission to uh go and get this military helicopter. Uh, Supposedly, Rogue's character is to pretend that he's dead. Chris's character is to pretend that he's just paralyzed. And so we eventually have these military forces that are getting called in to eventually just get tranquilized and set off to the side. And so now we have this helicopter that is to eventually get involved in good God. Anything else that I have to freaking remember through all of this rigmarole? Uh, what was the helicopter for? Oh my God, what was it for? Uh, take moment. I probably think I might have to pause here. Let me pause here. Let me think what the heck this helicopter was for. Good God. Yeah, I was like, what was I thinking? I'm like, freaking the helicopter, like them stealing the helicopter was for the mission to go and use the helicopter for the magnet. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, what was the helicopter for? Because I'm like, shouldn't that have been somewhere before all this? Um, but yeah, this movie's freaking confusing. But eventually it's easy to connect the dots because it's just like, your brain just starts to get scrambled with all like the severe generalness of this movie. So what ends up heading after the whole them going and doing this whole mission to transfer all this money, they then decide that evidently Max is to be going and confronting this like scientist again with a seemingly like we have Max who is to just like talk about this one guy that is to be with this scientist and how he's just like, dude, are you like how tall are you really? Like, are you kneeling down? Like, what is up with you? Why are you so short? So, uh, but we have the losers who are to go on and try and intercept Max, but that just leads to eventually these losers all trying to sneak into this place after all of them kind of having this whole like thing about them all like being in on this whole thing. And we have Pooch, who mentions that he has a wife who has a bun in the oven, and that Max is to have gotten shot, and he's like, yeah, I can't wait to get shot again. Let's go ahead and go. Uh, we have Rogue's character, who is very hesitant about doing this, but eventually he's just like, you know what, I'm in. Like, you know what, whatever. Like, we'll just do this mission. Like, we've almost died so many times anyways. What's the point of doing this now? And so, like, everybody eventually gets in on this, like, easily. Like, uh, we have Cougar, who's always in on every freaking mission. And so, but we end up finding out eventually Max is to be like really having like a pretty decent stack of the deck when it comes down to uh guys that are watching over Max's back. Like, supposedly I think Max was to hire, I think, special forces, or basically a ton of guys that were all similar to Cougar's skill set, and so they're all just like, ah, crap. But so they sneak into this place, and eventually that just leads them into just eventually getting caught. Eventually, Clay is to get caught by, is to eventually be caught by Wade. And then we end up finding out that Rogue had been working with Wade and Max this whole time, or for who knows how long. Like, I think they might have probably did say this at some point, but like, so Rogue was working against his team, and so like I was kind of expecting for there to be a double cross, and then like Rogue was working with them, but no, like we just have Rogue, who is Idris Elba's character, who just becomes the villain for the rest of this film. I'm like, okay, that just seemed kind of just weird. Uh, but I guess you can start to see eventually more and more that this guy had gotten very upset with like Clay, and like he just wanted to go home. He just consistently wanted to go home compared to everyone else, and you can kind of eventually just see uh, Rogue bargaining, like wanting to just bargain away his to get his freedom. So that leads us to eventually having Max uh, get the bombs and the stuff that he needs, and the way of which that they go about getting the money for this is basically stealing from the CIA. Like a whole like container just filled with large sums of money, I guess, that were all to be sent off the CIA. I guess Max had decided to steal all from them, and so the professor is to naturally assume that, oh, okay, well, like this money is just gonna go and just be mine, right? And we immediately have Max who's just like, well, change of plan, because we're like basically this guy is never gonna see one lick of this money. Basically they transitioned all this money onto a plane, and so what ends up eventually happening is that Max and Wade are going to eventually make it to this plane, but we eventually see Aisha, who ends up like shooting a bazooka to frickin' distract these military forces, so that way the losers who are tied up and shot, like Pooch has like had both of his legs shot out. So all of a sudden we have the losers who go and take out these men, and then head their way to try to figure out how to help Clay and the guys and whatever. But so what ends up eventually happening is Clay is to go after Rogue, and is to like try to do uh like like a like a God, what is the metaphor? Uh, two birds with one stone kind of thing. Because we have Wade who is trying to make it to the plane to intercept Rogue's character to stop him from stealing all of Max's money, and we have Rogue who is trying to leave the heck out of this location, but the pilot keeps mentioning that like they don't have enough like runway to lift off, and so Rogue is consistently telling this pilot, like, come on, let's lift off, hurry up, come on. So what ends up happening is so Clay is to be standing in the middle of these two things. And so all of a sudden Clay is to say like boom kind of thing, like shoot. And so what ends up happening is Wade ends up getting like his motorcycle like shot to where the motorcycle explodes, and then like the motorcycle ends up hitting the plane, and Wade ends up hitting like the propeller of this plane, and so like two birds one stone kind of thing. And so we just have like Clay looking at Cougar and he's like outstanding. So eventually that just leads Max, uh, who is to try to go up on this like crane like device, and he is holding some detonator for the bombs that if he is to like let it go, there's a 10-second like changing of like for when this bomb is to go off. So what ends up happening is Clay is to find where Max is, and so Clay is to mention it's like, well, yeah, like, look what I have here. I have a bomb, and you can't shoot me. And then all of a sudden, Clay like shoots Max in the arm, and so Clay is like, what was that? I can't do what now? So all of a sudden, Max would just be like, well, okay, fine. Like, if you want to play that. So Max goes and drops this detonator, and he's to drop it in the water. And so Clay is kind of like diving after it, and so Clay gets it just in time for this bomb to not go off. So Clay is to eventually like make it back to the losers, and they are in some Humvee, which I guess Pooch had found. So Pooch is to give Clay some duct tape to wrap the bomb so that way it's completely disarmed. So Max is to have like escaped and had found some kind of bus that is to have like had some guy steal his watch, and so that leads us to I guess like expect that I guess there's going to be a sequel out of this, that they're eventually going to come back for Max, because what ends up happening is that they end up having yet another mission after this. And so like Pooch is to like go up and like scale this building, make it through this one window, and like immediately I already knew what this mission was about, because I was just like, okay, like they have to come up with some kind of like, oh, there might be a reason for a sequel of this movie. So Pooch is to go into this room to we find out it's the room where Pooch's baby is being delivered, and it's a boy. I'm like, yeah, of course that's how they end the movie. I'm like, I kind of expected like immediately when Pooch is to go up there alone and to mention like I can do this, I can do this. I'm like, yeah, so it means that he's coming back to his family, and like he's gonna be a dad. And so like I'm sure Pooch is not going to be in the sequel. But yeah, so that is just the way that the movie fizzles out. I think there might have been some end credit scene, something. I didn't really go and focus too much on the end credit thing. If there was one or whatever, like there might have been. I really didn't care. Like I was just like We also had Chris Evans's character, who evidently had this like soccer team of his, like one of his family members that evidently he was trying to support because evidently they're in the playoffs, and eventually Jensen is to find out like who they're up against. And he's just like, whoa, like look at these guys. Like these look like inmates. These kids look like they're from like a prison or something. Like this does not look right. So, uh, but yeah. So with that said, yeah, that's all I wanted to say about this film, and it's a very severely generic in a roundabout way. There's probably a lot of stuff I missed here, but like people may or may not care about the details of this movie because they may or may not care about this review, which I hope they do, like, because I really appreciate it. Thank you for spending any time in this review, because it really matters. Like, it really like helps out a lot. So, without a doubt, I'm gonna get my way out of here to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.